Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Friday, September 9th. I'm starting it kind of earlier in the day, but frankly, I'm definitely feeling a little bit out of sorts. Uh, More and more, there are these points where it feels like I've just woken up on the wrong side of the bed, and I just like to wake up and go back to sleep. But yeah, I'm feeling a little awkward, a little perhaps sleepy already. So who knows what this Friday will turn into. Um, Sorry, I'm drinking water there. Apparently we have now uh, new gates added to solo mode. Tribe of the Abyssal Waters, I guess. Just trying to read this. A new accessory is added, which, yeah, spending gems on that's pretty stupid, but we'll probably do it. And then we have a new selection pack, which, weirdly, the new selection packs, I guess, are the point at the moment to buy new cards and consider changing the meta and changing what deck you're playing. Yeah, so now I have two solo things I haven't done, so that gives me an excuse to go back and do some solo recordings again, which the solo challenges are happening fairly frequently. You're getting one like once every couple of weeks. For the accountability section today, I barely even want to talk about it because it's just embarrassing how little I've accomplished. I spent what keeps happening is that I'm trying to get this WireGuard VPN to work, and it seems like, and several times it seems like it's gonna work or that it has a chance of working, and then it seems like no, it's not gonna work, just give up and go for a more basic setup. And then I see something else when trying to get the basic setup to even work that it seems to imply yes, actually it would work. I guess we'll just continuously buy these things, even though I'll never use them. So yeah, I'm a little confused as to why it's not working even on the simpler setup, and I was definitely spent the last couple hours just trying to get the simpler thing to work, and still not really getting it to agree with me and actually connect. Which is weird because I have it working on my router just fine, so it is just some, like, oddly, it really is just like 5 lines of information, but the 5 lines of information have to be absolutely correct, and I think the 5 lines of information have to be absolutely correct on both sides of the server and the client. And if you're not in that situation, then you're probably not going to be able to connect. And so, yeah, I've been frustrated by that, and I've pretty much accomplished nothing else. I for a brief second there, was getting so frustrated, I was thinking, okay, I probably should just do some recording instead, and didn't get to that. I took some time out to cook a pie and just cook several meals in the past couple of days, over this past week in particular. I am testing out my new countertop oven just to make sure it's not going to burst into flames. Unfortunately, I did buy a power monitoring plug that was supposed to be 16 amps for a skillet, which shouldn't actually go over 16 amps, but skillets, I bet, are notoriously liars about how much power they actually pull in some situations, and you just may never know. So, yeah, the skillet did not work, as it were, for the amount of current that was pulled through it with the Wi-Fi power monitoring thing. So I now need to try a different manufacturer that all the devices pretty much look at the same. It's just the level of quality that they claim as far as their internal mechanisms. So I need to bump up to 20 amps. If a 20 amp doesn't work, that would be shocking, because technically the circuits in the circuit breakers in the United States are 20 amps at most, and usually that's only for washing machines, which ironically that is when I put the current 16 amp one I have. I plugged it into the washing machine, just tempting fate certainly there to see if my washing machine actually would ever pull 16 amps, which maybe it will, maybe it won't. I'll just have to wait and see. It's a shame because the smart outlets of all the devices feel like they are the potential best one to start with. And they would definitely work for anything else, like floor lamps and other devices, as long as it's just not like a countertop oven or a skillet or a washing machine. Definitely not an electric dryer. Alright, so we don't have any of these cards, so we need to go ahead and just open 30 of these to start with. There are a lot of light bulbs that still make more sense than outlets, though, for a lot of switched wall light bulbs. That was certainly something that occurred to me, is that if I could get some smart light bulbs to turn on whenever the skillet turned on, then it would light up that area. And having a kitchen specifically turn on lighting when you walk in the room or when you start cooking in a specific spot is an interesting thought, although maybe not so necessary. It will really come down to just where the wall outlet switches are and how used to you are turning lights on and off, because you definitely are training yourself when you move towards like a smart home. This is a new animation, although that isn't. When you're starting to go to automated things in a smart home, you are starting to train yourself away from the idea of having to push any buttons when you walk in a room, or having to actively request things to happen. Whereas the idea of a smart home would be automations for almost every scenario. So yeah, I've been very unproductive this week, and not really set myself up to be much more productive over the weekend. On top of all of that, my macro didn't want to work today, and it seems like we might be hitting that point which some of the extensions are going to start asking for extra permissions in Chrome, or potentially some of the extensions in Chrome are just going to stop working altogether, which that would be an absolute nightmare if my macros and programs to set up the news and schedule YouTube videos just stopped working, because while those did help make me more efficient, they came so late to the party that they really haven't helped me get far ahead in recording. Like, any progress or anything big that I guess this immortal royalty here tells me that why this is unlocked here. I guess this is a non-foil version. And this is a non-foil version? Interesting. Before we open another 10 packs, we should just double check to make sure there's still a reasonable reason to open another 10 packs, and I would say yes. At least another 10. Probably 20. Yeah, so yeah, I definitely feel out of sorts. And while I did say in the last stream I'm out of the whole Tuya/Smart Life obsession with devices, there's definitely some opportunities to stick my toe back in here and there. But I don't want to get super crazy into it. Arguably, I probably should have worked on my irrigation system this Amazon Prime Day and just bought a whole bunch of irrigation system material, like sprinkler heads and plumbing and things like that. Not to really even expand it, but just to replace the half effort that I have it at right now. It works right now, but it could work better with more sprinkler heads, and if I'm going to add more sprinkler heads, moving away from using garden hoses and garden hose threaded connections would be the right move. But also, I don't particularly enjoy the idea of taking on a physical project this year, or maybe ever. Wow, just all normals. That was a terrible draw. Now, of course, the danger on this is that you don't get a single ultra rare or super rare. I think it's super rares or ultra rares. And so now we've unlocked the Azure of Ivory. Yeah. So if I was to not get a super rare in this 10 draw, even though it says at least one super rare, then it would guarantee me an ultra rare in the next draw or something like that. But regardless of how that works, it's still a pretty crappy system because it demands that you spend another 1,000 gems, and we are running out of gems. It barely is justifiable to even draw another 30 on this. The good news, though, I'll say, is that we do have the crystals now, just as this came out, which leaves me in a good position to save up my crystals for the next selection pack, which is probably not coming out for at least 30 days. So that's a fairly nice setup. The bad news, though, is you open these selection packs and they still really just don't mean much to me. And maybe that's particularly my problem, that I'm just not into the cards as much as I should be. But I just wave the mouse over them and see I'm getting a bunch of cards, but I'm not looking at the cards, I'm not reading what the cards do. I know a significant number of the cards are not really going to be important. Pretty much if it's a normal card, it's probably not important as a concept. as a card to ever play or use. And that is something I think Hearthstone, at least in its early days, really did a great job addressing, is because their expansions were very small and fairly infrequent. So every single card in the expansion usually was pretty obviously part of a theme and pretty obviously going to be useful. Like, if it was the Pirates expansion in Hearthstone, most of the cards were pirates. The movement was to play pirate cards almost exclusively, almost ignoring all the previous cards in previous expansions. And then maybe there was some top tier meta gameplay for the highly ranked players that would take just one or two of those cards from the expansion and add it to their standard deck. But there was definitely entire expansions that were around just like Cthulhu-like cards. And the only reason you'd play any of the cards in the expansion is because you played that one Cthulhu card, and they literally gave you the Cthulhu card by doing the solo expansion. Hearthstone really was groundbreaking, I have to say, as far as just engaging me personally to actually look at the cards and care about the cards. Here's, I guess, our final outcome. We could try to push for more super rares and more ultra rares, certainly, but it's going to be diminishing returns. And we didn't get in that situation where we need to draw another 10 pack. Unfortunately, we are in this situation now where we, at best, at the end of this stream, maybe could grab a 10 pack of both of these. So, looking at this is an odd pack because it's all extra cards. No, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Featured cards is what I need to look at. You have some cards here where you have 4 or 5 copies of them, and then you have a lot of cards you don't have. I'm actually a little shocked I don't have Eldritch Golden Lord. I feel like I would have had that, but maybe I've just seen so many other people play it. Whereas this featured card pack, yeah, this one would definitely not be on the table. There's just far too many cards in this card pack that I already have. So yeah, we'll grab a 10 pack of the selection pack, and then I think we'll just leave it at that. Of course, your diminishing returns on selection packs compared to feature packs, or whatever these are called, in that only 4 of the featured cards are actually going to be from that featured card set, and then the other 4 are just going to be standard part of the 6,000 Master Duel set. Even having played this since day one, though, there's so many cards that you just won't have playing free to play, so I still am getting fairly high rates of new cards showing up. But you do run into the other problem, certainly, of there just not really being a lot of extra cards to turn into crafting points. Even though you have multiple of cards, a significant number of the multiples of cards that I have are from the legacy packs, and those are not disbandable. I don't really know the reason behind that. It seems like that's something that they should address. And I just don't know what Konami is really planning on doing here as far as addressing anything. Like, it does seem like they oddly want to have 3 different Yu-Gi-Oh games that play 3 different ways when it's fairly obvious that everything should just be in one launcher, and that there just should be like a Master Duel mode to play Master Duels, and then there should be a Rush Duel mode to play Rush Duels, and then there should be a Duel Links mode to play Duel Links. It just doesn't. Wow, that is a lot of foil cards I just got. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me to have 3 different teams on 3 different code bases, all making the exact same game. Even if there was like an upstream team, well, I guess I have that card now. If there was like an upstream team that was actively working towards programming how the cards play, and they were working on all the animations, and then there were several subdivided teams working on each individual game, that still doesn't really make a lot of sense. I don't have enough gems, but by the end of today's stream I probably will. The question to ask though is, how important is it to have another 1,000 gems? Because it may not really be that important. Most of these secret packs I've already opened. Like, this is a good candidate here. So Piercing Winds would be one to consider opening. And this isn't a bad candidate either, but there's pretty much no way I'm going to have 2,000 gems, and these have the 24-hour timers on them. This is the one we were opening, and arguably, maybe you should just, like, go for another copy of that guy. Even though otherwise this is not particularly the best candidate of secret packs to open. And as far as bonus packs, yeah, we could open 30 bonus packs if we wanted to, but there's really not a reason to. So those would be like legitimate card draws. So dismantling extra cards should actually give me some crafting points. Not particularly a huge amount of crafting points though. 430 for normal, 440 for rare. We can go ahead and dismantle that. It would still be a nightmare, and it's just not worth the extra time to do, particularly to do it on screen, to say, give me all the cards that I don't own that would be normal or rares, because you'd have to sort by like number owned here, then you have to scroll down here. Let's see. Probably don't want any of the basic cards, so you just want to start with like this, and your best bet would be to add one copy of each into a new deck, and then come over here and batch generate cards not owned. But I would have to certainly do that several times over, and I assume I want affect monsters in general, or spells or traps in general. Own at least one copy of each of those. It feels a little odd, certainly, that you don't get more of a lifetime bonus for owning a certain number of spells, or owning specific spells or specific cards. Like, I don't think there's major rewards around any of that or anything like that. Alright, well, I can say today is going to also be quite the mess as far as fall list cleanup, which we're gonna have to go through because of the way everything was messed up. So I'm gonna have to start with several different fall list cleanups because of the way the fall list the macro broke. And we're gonna have to just start with that because I can't even see the other tabs. So we have a game here called Tower Arena, which is not even on Steam anymore, which is not a very common reason that something gets removed from the fall list. It's apparently or was an online PvP game, which means it really shouldn't have been on the fall list in the first place, because even as maybe a trading card game, it wasn't going to blow me away looking at these images. Let's see. Let's go ahead and set this here. Cannot be. Your player can activate monster effects unless the number of monster effects that the player has previously activated that turn is less than the number of monster card types currently on the field. Okay. So we can get around that, I think, by doing that. So this is an odd game. Nope. We can't get around that doing that. Okay, well then we'll just send this to the graveyard. Cut this in half. See if that effect works. Good enough. Attack and end the turn. Alright, see. Next we have a game called Tawaga Among the Shadows, which looks like it might be a high action beat 'em up from 2020. It's 88% positive. In a funny way, it's kind of more of a hover around bullet hell shooter or stand in one place shooter. It's almost like what you would do with a twin stick shooter if you weren't going to look at the top down perspective that you would expect from a twin stick shooter. It's interesting. It's not particularly very relevant at 36 reviews, but good enough to make it to the wish list. This game is mixed, so we can get rid of that. My mouse wheel doesn't seem like it wants to cooperate at the moment. All kinds of Windows updates too. So everything has a potential to break. Although in all fairness, my computer and its whole trusted platform module, TPM module, and AMD nightmare, having that enabled and having that literally break the RAM in my computer several times, and having that cause like micro stuttering and something else with OBS causing micro stuttering. That nightmare that went on for like 3 or 4 months this year and really slowed me down, I think, more than anything. that hasn't showed its ugly head again. So thank goodness for that, at least. In probably the last 3 months, there's been one game that crashed, and in a completely different way, which makes me feel fairly secure and safe. But yeah, well, I wouldn't imagine it's been a particularly good year for anybody. It has been a pretty bad year for me as far as just getting things to work and trying to continue to make progress. It's a little harder to complain about things such as just not getting subscribers and not getting enough views as you would like to get. That is another thing, certainly, though, that it would have been nice. Certainly, it would have been nice last year. It would have been nice even the year before to be more successful on YouTube. But I would say I am still kind of in a catch-22 where I don't have a better thing I could really do. Just I have such special limitations as far as what I can do physically and health-wise. Even if I might be mentally qualified for it. Keep sticking that card back into, or sticking cards back into the deck, which is probably not the right move. Let's see, we have a game called Torment of Armistice. I don't know why some of these games would have even been on the fall list. Obviously, I've been too generous. This is obviously an attempt at a fighting game, but it has no user reviews, it's early access, it's probably mostly just an asset flip. Turning carts. Is this a VR game? No. It says a VR and non-VR. Yeah, there might be something to that idea. So I'll put that on the wish list. Although, probably shouldn't be on the wish list if I'm not really making any real choice there. Connection failure victory there. Yeah, certainly also, I haven't really been doing anything with my internet, and yet I have been noticing some internet problems too, although it benefited me in that case. And yeah, I don't know if that's just randomness or if I just need to tighten the limiters, I guess, as it were, as far as the quality of service. I probably just need to tighten the limiters and get to what is a more reasonable amount of bandwidth. Let's see. Let's continue burning through these. And, yeah. I'm not getting any frame drops or anything, but the mouse, again, just does not feel like it wants to really move today. Almost feels like the mouse acceleration needs to be turned up. I didn't mess with the mouse acceleration when I played Portal Reloaded inside the game. I wonder if maybe that messed something else up. Here we have Toho Monster Tower Defense game. There definitely was a point where anything Toho seemed like it might be from the same makers, but I don't really think that's the case. I think almost it's more the case that anything called Toho is either a descriptor or it's kind of this open source Asian idea where several different developers and makers have been able to use the Toho name. Like, it could be that it's more of a descriptor, or it's becoming more of a descriptor. Although it tends to be kind of more as a side-scrolling shooter. This is a visual novel, rated very positively, but yeah, I think at this point I want to get rid of it. It may also be that Toho Gensokyo means something different than just Toho, but that there does seem to be a consistent, like, red-headed witch character. But notice these are all different developers and very different games, so there's almost this inconsistency to it that is more than you would see amongst, like, even a Mario game. This is a Metroidvania game, and I will say I'm more interested in that. So if I'm going to put one on the wish list, it would be the Metroidvania game. Then Toho Blooming Chaos here. Looks like it's a top-down twin-stick shooter game. But yeah. Part of the thing, certainly, though, is that there's just no relevancy to the Western world as far as Toho. Nobody in the Western world talks about Toho games or anything like that. This game Totems might be something kind of like a boombox clone, where it's box that you're trying to stack, or maybe not trying to stack. I'll give it a little bit more time, but it's probably not going to succeed. And then I probably shouldn't give it more time if Totems 1 here also came out fairly early and it just doesn't have any relevancy. And see, when you see two games that look almost identical released similarly in a small amount of time, that is the time where you can't give a lot of faith into the game developer and believe that they're actually trying to do a good job. Just make sure. I didn't really read what that card did, but I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that destroying the field spell has more of an effect. I suppose it's worth mentioning, even though it has very much nothing to do with video games, that the I guess you'd call the Queen of the United Kingdom, the UK, is what it would be called, died. She was like 97 years old. There's really not a lot to say there as far as surprise or as far as video games are related. There is certainly a like catastrophe way you could look at it, that this might be another aspect that would really hurt the British, like Britain, in particular, amongst just having bad actual leaders in prime ministers and major increases in prices of things and Brexit problems on top of that. Like, at any point it is somewhat possible, but not highly likely, that any country could run into major trouble or just straight up collapse, even if we went to the most extreme thought and did suspect that that the Britain would collapse. Even in that scenario, that doesn't really affect video games too much. Like, there's only a couple video game companies of note in Britain, and I'm specifically saying Britain there because I doubt the Queen passing is going to lead to any other major changes in any of the other UK territories, unless the new king was just like incredibly insane, and even at that, I don't think much would happen. I guess technically the new king could declare war on somebody, but yeah, you're really getting deeper and deeper into the realms of fantasy. Although inherently that is almost certainly what everybody's going to just talk about, is that we will have a ton of conversations happen around the Queen. Again, into the realm of flights of fantasies, I guess if the Queen was specifically anti-video games and she was pushing for an agenda of less video game support or anything like that, that there's no evidence of that whatsoever, but it would be, I guess, intriguing if that was the case. Definitely am not feeling particularly energetic today. Yeah, I mentioned I made a strawberry pie. That's a very big pivot there from the Queen's death to a strawberry pie, but yeah, there was a bunch of frozen strawberries I had in my freezer that had been around for a very long time, and chopping them up and turning them into mush for a pie filling, I definitely thought there was a chance that it was going to just turn into a rancid mess of well, I don't know what else you would call it, just a rancid mess of pie filling. But shockingly, it worked. It came out good, tasted fine. Did turn very brown looking, but I imagine the pie filling was just caramelizing all the sugar that I threw in it. Yeah. And so, yeah, it hardly was a bright red strawberry color for what was effectively just sugar, cinnamon, and some flour and strawberries. Frozen strawberries. I didn't quite cook the pie crust perfectly because I let a drop of water be in the pan before cooking the crust, and even a small drop of water or two caused the crust to bubble up. Not a big deal though, because I really didn't have that much filling anyways, and I thought I was burning the crust quite a bit, but actually I didn't. I burnt the edges and should have put more of a protector there, but that's fairly common in making a pie. Moving on. Let's see. Traction control here from March. Still early access and not looking particularly good. I suppose this is a case where I have grown even from March of 2022. So, like, I definitely feel like my standards, when I am not emotionally drained and unwilling to make decisions, have increased. And definitely a lot of these games that I look at the fall list now are not things I would really consider. I'm going to give this more time just because it's weird looking, and I do love weird looking things. Weird games in particular. Select that one. Guess we'll select that one. And then we'll select that one. And select that one. These Friday streams in particular always tend to be a little bit slower, more laid back, which there's really no good reason for that to be the case. Like, I can be slow and laid back any day of the week since I'm effectively making my own hours, but there is still some of that subconsciousness, I guess, just in my head. And just generally, I think the way TV and other things are set up, they tend to be a little bit slower and more laid back on Fridays, and the video game news itself tends to be slower unless less important things tend to happen on Fridays. Let's see, this is a VR game from 2021. I kind of want to say no to this. It's like a parkour VR game, which really does not make a lot of sense. Seems to be just a collection of programming experiments, really. So yeah, we can get rid of that. Certainly, I could start to curate more of the experience for VR and get rid of bad VR games on the fall list. That's definitely something I can do every time. This is a game that I would like to see get more reviews, but I may just have to make an exception. But I'll give it more time for now. Here we have a Castlevania game, which this is 81% popular. Again, I guess I will give it more time, but honestly I probably would have just made an exemption and gone ahead and allowed it. The thing about Castlevania games in particular is that there just aren't that many Castlevania clones as much as there are Metroid clones. Toys HD here never got good reviews, unfortunately, because this was a game I did play on the Xbox 360, but I think the port is pretty terrible. Here I'm about to lose. And in all fairness, I don't know if I actually made it all the way to the end even on the Xbox 360. One thing that is very different from my experience of playing video games when I was younger and not being a YouTuber is that there was a significantly higher percentage of games that I would have just said no to and rage quit or just gotten busy with and not played. And certainly when you get back to like games I played in my young childhood, when playing the NES, for instance, I have no idea if I actually ever beat Super Mario Bros. 1, or I almost certainly didn't beat Punch-Out! I'm not sure if I beat Zelda. Zelda 1, maybe. Like, I've seen people beat those, and those memories just mix in my head as potentially me thinking I beat them. But it's very possible I didn't. I'm fairly certain I probably didn't beat Super Mario Bros. 3. And that's not atypical for most of the kids that would have been playing games at that time. Those games in particular were extremely difficult and often unfair and impossible. So, yeah. I have become more of a completionist gamer, maybe not a better gamer, certainly by being a YouTuber and trying to have that accountability of trying to make a series that goes all the way to the end. It doesn't always happen that way. There are plenty of games on my channel that I just straight up decided to rage quit, but that number has been fairly small. I probably rage quit, oh, I'd say maybe 7 or 8 at most games where I've probably covered. Oh, I'd have to assume it's somewhere around 20 at the bare minimum to 120 games on my channel. Which even 20 may sound like a small number, but if you're just playing 2 games per month and you're doing that every month in a year, you're only going to get 24. Yeah, inherently I imagine there is somebody out there that plays way more video games than I do, both in hours and in variety. But I really don't have to compare myself to them because honestly YouTube doesn't promote those people anyways. Let's see, we have a game on Steam here called Towerland, which looks like it's a Zelda or Binding of Isaac clone. Unfortunately, I doubt it's going to have any real relevancy. And it's from March. I'll give it some more time. Tower Princess Knight's Trail is mostly positive. Let's see. Yeah, but it's no longer available on Steam, which sucks. This really highlights a factor, certainly, as far as where even if you're not going to call it Steam, the database that Steam uses should be more open towards the idea of all games being listed. If Steam could make a separate website that was a common carrier, for instance, instead of curating information, then that would potentially put them in a different legal situation as far as anybody claiming copyright. Sniper Ranger says, both my favorite streamers are live. I don't know who to watch. And then he says, what's up? Well, at least this week, and that's about as much as I can say, I've been fairly consistent about streaming this time. Yeah, and I never know what time to really stream, nor do I really have a lot of options or control at it, because if I don't stream at all, then it would just be a case of me giving up and not streaming that day. He says, Sniper Ranger says, oh, watch out for the Despia, their new support are out. I tried to watch a couple of YouTube videos that were suggested to me as far as the changes happening with these new cards, but I didn't get very far into it before I lost interest. Yeah, I do think Valve would benefit from having a game database site, even if the game is not available for sale, and then running ads from themselves to Steam, or selling ads to other storefronts even on that database site. I think that could work fairly well, actually. Is if Valve had, say, gamesdb.com or whatever would be a website like that. That could be something, but that's not what happens. So at the moment you have this weird situation where on occasion you see a game listed on Steam that doesn't look even terrible or really seem like it has a reason to be listed on Steam and yet not available for sale. And I imagine there is a juicy story as to why a game would not be for sale. Some fight. Sniper Ranger says that I'm facing the deck right now to be worried about, and that he's sorry for the late warning, and anything he types is going to be 30 minutes delayed anyways. So yeah, it's kind of a shame because this Tower Princess Knight's Trail game doesn't look terrible, but also there's no reason for it to sit on the fall list forever if it's been delisted. Banish that card and see if that does something. Let's see, we have a game here called Tower of Sage. I wouldn't have had so many fall list games open if I had just run the macro once, seen that it wasn't going to work, and then just manually run the segments of the macro, which is what I eventually did. But instead I decided to bang my head against the wall. I guess I'll give this a little bit more time. At a certain level I'm going to have too many games on the fall list that are these card-based Darkest Dungeon type experiences, and once I play Darkest Dungeon I probably will fail. Sniper Ranger says Balloon Towers is something I liked back in the day. Hope that game fulfills the expectations. Balloon Towers. Yeah, there's a lot of tower defense games that definitely are inspired by things like Balloon Towers. I don't think there's any like consistent sequel from the same creators. Tower of Approval here doesn't even really look like it's a English language game, even though it claims to be English. And I guess at this point I'm probably not willing to play games that feel like they are Chinese first or Japanese first. Also, this game doesn't look particularly that good, so that's easy enough to say no to. A point-and-click adventure game called Tree Trunk Brook. This looks fairly different, and different is good, so it's also rated very positively. That's what we're looking for. So we'll put that on the wish list. Treasures of Aegean. I remember seeing this game when it came out, and it didn't really get a lot of promotion. Unfortunately, that is the problem. Is you definitely have publishers like Numbskull Games, which is a name I recognize, that often just don't have the funding to really advertise things or don't care to really advertise things. And so if there isn't enough hype or talk around the game, it just dies in obscurity. Inherently, this is the problem with mainstream video game journalists and video game journalists in general, is that we all fairly often fail to do our job, which is to find interesting new games to talk about, or at least interesting new angles as far as how to talk about games. And instead everybody is just trying to cover the same AAA game that has a ton of advertisement for it already and does not need the press. And I imagine that's the case in standard journalism too, is that plenty of like mom and pop hamburger joints could really use some articles written about them, but it sometimes is just more sexy to write about the new McDonald's that opened up down the street. That's the 20th one this year. And that is definitely the reason, or part of the reason, why I spend such a massive amount of time every week trying to look at the new games that come out on Steam and really have a more broad, better perspective of what is actually getting released on offer. Even if it is the case that 90% of it is garbage. At a certain level, something like the CES probably should be closer to what I do, where CES would have just been flooded with small indie developers trying to advertise their game, but even CES was never really like that. As for this game, yes, it does barely have over 30 reviews, but it does rate very positively, so I'll put that on the wish list. Let's see, Treasure Drifter Nyan. I think I probably would say no to this game. It's at 75%, which isn't particularly high, and it has only 20 reviewers. It does seem to potentially also be like a Chinese game or an Asian game of some sort. Often when you see just the same background changing and nothing else really changing, that tends to be a sign that your game is just not going to be particularly that varied or interesting. So I definitely say, if you're trying to advertise a game, do not do the gimmick of the background shifting with the characters in the same spot. Yeah, I'm going to take that off the follow list. If it had been visually polished a little bit more, I would have given it more of a chance. Traveler's Origin of the Virus. It's some kind of base building game, but it just has no relevancy to it. From 2021, which I have to just assume that some of that has to do with COVID, and that this was just an early COVID reference game. Although you seem to be shooting giant monsters, like creatures. This actually doesn't look terrible as a game, but looking at the reviews from SteamDB's rating, it is terrible. Early access, single player, 2021. Inherently, I guess it is probably smarter for most reputable game developers to not make games based on a virus pandemic like experience after COVID happened. And I will say they have been remarkably restrained in not making a game like that. I keep thinking of something I want to say, but I keep forgetting what I was saying also. Right, do we have enough to do this? Cross your fingers and hope. Oh yeah, I keep wanting to say, yeah, Steam Direct, even though it originally had a lot of problems, at this point it feels like it has kind of balanced out between the secret rules and curation that obviously is happening behind the scenes with Steam. Like, we definitely have, I think, made more of a egalitarian experience, or Valve has, by introducing Steam Direct and just allowing people to pay $100 to put their games on Steam. And it took maybe 5 years, but eventually people realized that, yeah, if you put a garbage game on Steam for $100, you're not going to make that $100 back. Oops. That's a new person, seemingly, that can use my characters as a summon material. Although, in all fairness, I still think there's plenty of reason to be like mad at Valve or unhappy at Valve, because if they did implement Steam Direct, they've really failed to do anything else. Like, they did make the Steam Deck, but even at that point, I have to question, are they doing enough for the Steam Deck month to month, or did they simply do a big enough amount at the beginning and then stopped caring after those first initial pre-orders, and now they're stuck trying to deliver Steam Decks without there being major software updates or major ideas as far as how can you make a Steam Deck more of a console-like experience. I haven't heard word one as far as major improvements or updates to the Steam OS. And I follow their Steam Twitter, not Twitter feeds, but I think I follow their Twitter feed and their RSS like updates feed for when the Steam website updates. We may get some big updates, I suppose, when we have a Christmas, like Black Friday type sale. That would make some sense. Yeah, it would make a lot of sense that Steam would have a big sale, a winter sale of some sort, and that there might be some major update or major focus around the Steam Deck, because there definitely aren't a lot of games to do this. What is this guy doing? These guys seem to have the ability to use anything they're pointing to as a summon, which, if people are going to play that kind of deck now a lot more, then I have to be a lot more careful about where I put my characters. Inherently, this may be the beginning of the end. I may have made it to Platinum once, but yeah, if I'm going to be slow, which I probably am going to be slow, to update a new meta deck, then other people won't be as slow and they'll just defeat me. Here we have a game on the follow list called Trash Sailors, which feels like a different take on that game Raft, unfortunately, looking at the reviews. Yeah. I kind of like this art style. It's a shame that this is just not well received. But it isn't well received, and in all fairness, Raft as a game is probably the only Raft game worth playing. We have a visual novel called Trap Genesis, which, having the word trap in it, I assume then this is at least one of these characters that looks feminine is actually a male. The grand finale of the 10-year history of the Trap series, this creation myth of birth. So it's cross-dressing, basically. They could all be cross-dressing. But you don't get a lot of Trap stuff. It's fully Japanese voice acted. You don't get a lot of Trap stuff in general in Japan, and you definitely don't get you definitely don't get a lot on Steam. So I guess in that case I put that on the wish list, but honestly I probably would never buy it. Arguably I am opening myself up then to somebody else gifting me the Trap visual novel, and and then I'd feel somewhat obligated to actually play the game and make the footage. And certainly it could be slightly inflammatory playing a game with traps in it and talking about traps, because there's a lot of slacktivists, LGBTQ plus slacktivists out there that that are not happy with the concept of traps, and definitely trying to make all traps be labeled as transgendered when that's not what that means at all. Sniper Ranger generously offers to help me build a new deck, and yeah, it would take the same amount of time, if not longer, for me to try and build a new deck with assistance than it would for me just to go to a website. And I did see a website, like masterduel something.com, masterduelmeta.com or something like that, so I could just go to that website and figure it out. If there was an overlay program that could scan my specific account and see what cards I have and tell me like what's the best deck that I can build with my current crafting points and the cards I already have, that would be great. There was a software called Hearthstone Deck Tracker that did that, because then that would mean I would have a better chance of actually making something that's my best bet of winning. But yeah, I probably will have a point this weekend where I'm fairly frustrated, and when that point happens, that would be a great time for me to just go online and figure out what the new best meta would be. Next we have a game on the fall list here called Transaruby, which looks like it's a bit of a platformer, almost like maybe even a Mega Man type game. But it also is tagged Metroidvania, and having watched the trailer, I got a slightly different experience than what I get looking at the screenshots, which inherently that is a problem too, is that I very often am just, I should have probably activated that. I very often am just looking at the screenshots of games, and in movement, games could be very different. But that is also true in the fact that in interaction, the games could also be very different. Plenty of games have cutscenes that look great, but in the actual controlling part, there's problems. Here we have Transient Extended Edition, which looks interesting, but unfortunately is mixed reviewed. So, gotta just follow mob rule. And inherently, I don't think I agree with the idea of covering the games on the follow list first. Video game news is way more important, and yeah, cleaning up the follow list is really me just doing my own personal cleanup and has no actual importance to it or at the moment. Yeah, I'm looking at old games and considering them. I'm not looking at new games. And inherently, my system of putting games on a follow list and waiting several months to check to see how they're reviewed always means I will never cover a game brand new unless it's just a game I absolutely was hyped on and knew I was going to buy on day one anyways. And I've very rarely done that, and it hasn't really worked out for my YouTube channel in any way. Yep. Transformers Battlegrounds, I vaguely feel like this game was somewhat badly reviewed originally, but this may actually be a different Transformers games, actually. It's 84% positive now and from 2020, so put that on the wish list. Although I question whether Transformers are that relevant. Certainly people of a certain age would have thought that Transformers were a big deal and Ninja Turtles and games like that are big deals, but most of these reboot series have not ever played out in any important way. They are cheap cash grabs, and the next generation of kids just don't care about anything. Like the Ghostbusters is a great example. I told a little kid like 5-6 years ago, I was showing them my Lego Ghostbusters firehouse, and I said that's from the Ghostbusters, and they just said the who, and I'm like, yeah, that's right. They don't even know what the Ghostbusters are. This was in that small region when the Ghostbusters reboot hadn't come out yet with the women, nor Afterlife had come out. Probably does say something about society too, that there was not a major hatred for Afterlife, or really anything to be said about Afterlife. But it probably doesn't say that much because people are certainly more upset about other things. I guess probably when the Ghostbusters reboot with the women came out, that there wasn't as much for people to complain about, and now there's just so many other things for people to complain about that complaining about a movie is just so ridiculous. Even if there might be some legitimate complaints to be made about movies trying to delete the history of a beloved 80s movie and push ridiculous SJW nonsense, or sell themselves on ridiculous SJ nonsense, even if they really weren't trying to push it. This game Trance, has 3 reviews. It's from January 2022. I guess I'll be generous and give it some more time, although I really shouldn't. Then Train Mechanic Simulator. Now, having a simulator where you're being the mechanic of a trains is an interesting idea. Unfortunately, the reviews are pretty bad too. And that's the last one of those follow list games I have to cover for a while, I think, and so we can now go through the Video Games Chronicle articles. Some of these are old articles, certainly. A new Xbox Series XS update adding party chat noise suppression feature today. someone on Giant Bomb, which the Bombcast I'm still listening to for some stupid reason, it's worse and worse with fewer and fewer people actually even showing up. But they explained the noise suppression as the thing that will get rid of the beeping smoke detector sound, that apparently when you play online you hear a lot of beeping smoke detectors. Sniper Ranger also was talking about the card that I thought was eating my cards to evolve. Turns out actually it was just destroying a card every time it was summoned. So it wasn't as complicated of an effect as I thought it would be. Let's see. CD Projekt Red says Witcher 3's new gen release is on track for late 2022. I would definitely have a hard time playing Witcher 3 a second time, even as someone who hasn't done the DLC and would like to do the DLC. Like, I think it would be fairly difficult to commit the time to get through the main narrative to go off and even do the expansion, unless there's a fairly easy way to get through even that first couple of hours to the point where you get to that main big landmass before you go to the big island landmass, that was the worst part of Witcher 3. Plus, I just have so many games. It'd be hard to justify going back to Witcher 3. Also, Witcher 3 is in this weird position where it was probably the last AAA game to try to push the narrative or push the limits of video games in any direction towards the mature, because there is like straight up gore and cruelty and brutality and nudity and sex in those games. It was very much trying to have more of a Game of Thrones aspect, but that's something that's always been in the Witcher series. And I definitely remember that when Witcher 3 was announcing what kind of content it was going to have in it, that YouTube Gaming and Twitch were specifically saying, if you don't focus on these aspects, we'll let you stream the game. And they mostly, I think, stayed true to that case and didn't try to take down a bunch of videos on Twitch or YouTube. Whereas I wonder if the next Witcher has that same level of quality, in which there is sex and nudity here and there. If all of a sudden we start to see Twitch and YouTube Gaming going, no, you can't have that. We're more pro censorship now than we were then. Because that would kind of make sense if they were more pro censorship now. It also would make a lot of sense if the new Witcher saga gets completely away from all of that. You just don't have any nudity or sex in the next Witcher game. CG Projekt Red expects the next Witcher saga to include more than one game, which is not really saying anything, and we'd already really talked about that. It'd be kind of crazy. They also say they're fully committed to Cyberpunk Beyond 2077 solo expansion. The game's only major DLC, Phantom Liberty, will be released next year. I suppose if you've got to have Cyberpunk something succeed, making an anime with Netflix is a good start. You probably also would want to just make a demake of Cyberpunk 2077. Just announce that the next Cyberpunk game in the series is going to be a 16-bit graphics game. It's going to be flat. It's not going to be 3D. It's not going to be open world. Just try to remove as many sales points as you can to make something that you tried to make as a AAA game into something that is much more manageable as a AA game or an indie game, because it kind of is more. I'd say CD Projekt Red at this point is probably better suited to present themselves as an indie company than a attempted AAA developer. I suppose it is also realistic to say that the Cyberpunk 2077 in the wrong ways tried to push the adult content, tons of nudity and dildos and sex toys in Cyberpunk 2077, but it's kind of done more in a Saints Row comedic vibe than I think in a let's do this legitimately vibe. I've got nothing, so just play cards. Multiversus new update completely revamps hitboxes, hurtboxes, and projectiles. Which hurtboxes and hitboxes. I'd have to kind of look up the difference there. I imagine a hurtbox is the box around which a player hurts the other person, where a hitbox is probably a slightly smaller box at which that player takes damage. But yeah, if this was the before at that stance and this is now the after, that is a major improvement, and really such a major improvement that it should have never even been released in early access in that state. There seems to be a long change list here overall. I can't, it is probably my personal pessimism, but I can't help but think that Multiversus might turn out to be a really great game and nobody will care, because by the time they get it to that great game status, everybody will have played it in beta and lost interest and just burned themselves out at that. Whereas something like Smash Brothers, I think the Smash Brothers game was a really great game. Even the very first Smash Brothers game was a really great game, with only having like 8 characters, and every iteration has just added more characters and more tweaks. But at no point do I feel like any of the Smash Brothers games were absolute garbage or needed major changes or in beta states. Let's see. Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal have officially taken over control of Tomb Raider and Deus Ex. The studios are now responsible for gameplay and personal data related to the various titles, which I guess this might also be hinting at that they were collecting gameplay and personal data for Tomb Raider and Deus Ex. Let's see. It's, I think, important to point out that I believe Crystal Dynamics is owned by Embracer Group at this point. If not, this is a different situation where Crystal Dynamics is in charge of making a game in the Tomb Raider and Deus Ex series that is owned by Embracer Group, so they're being hired out, which would be slightly different experience, certainly, or a slightly different situation. But Square Enix, the Japanese company, definitely is done with Tomb Raider and Deus Ex. They've been done with Deus Ex and Tomb Raider. Deus Ex in particular could use a lot of work, so if they could convince CD Projekt Red to combine their experience in making Deus Ex games to make Cyberpunk games instead, or on top of making Deus Ex games, that probably wouldn't be a terrible situation. If they spent 2 to 4 years making a Deus Ex game and then they spent 2 to 4 years making a Cyberpunk game. There isn't a huge difference between Deus Ex games and Cyberpunk games either, anyways. It might even behoove them to abandon both the Cyberpunk 2077 titles and the Deus Ex titles and make a game that is cyberpunk in a new world. But yeah, that probably would be a fresh start for them, certainly, if they went that direction. I guess on the first turn I always should just end with Borbo. Let's see. The Amazon Games boss, according to Video Games Chronicles, explains why its Lord of the Rings MMO is cancelled. Christoph Hartmann thinks Amazon and Tencent were too big to work together on the game. Which, what does that mean, really? Two companies are too big to work together? That wouldn't lead to the game being cancelled, though. So that really sounds like a cop-out. And as far as Amazon's Lord of the Rings efforts, so far, I haven't heard anyone singing their praises, while I've seen a lot of people mad at it before it was even released, as far as the Amazon Prime Video series and the Daedalic Entertainment game, Golem game, has been delayed, so we'll have to wait and see if people like that or not, although I don't imagine it'll be amazingly good. But yeah, if you legitimately had two companies that were too big, if it was just like Sony PlayStation and Microsoft were working together and they both wanted to make a Lord of the Rings MMO, and you felt like, well, we're too big of companies to work together, then obviously what you would have done is have one of the companies go their separate way and become a silent partner in it, and just have the other company be in charge of developing it. You wouldn't cancel the project unless you just have two egos running two different companies, neither one of them willing to be the silent partner and make the profits without having the reins and control of the game. So yeah, that comes off as a cop-out. Now, in all fairness, what is an MMO around the Lord of the Rings universe going to really look like other than a World of Warcraft clone? Which I think I saw some news that World of Warcraft classic servers, that there's some talk that they may get rid of a major feature in the classic servers, like a mega realm is what I think they were talking about getting rid of. And I don't know if that's a big deal or not, and it sounds like it is just the beginning of talk, but it could happen fairly quickly. I doubt the World of Warcraft classic servers or the main modern servers are doing anything doing great. I imagine their numbers are dwindling day by day as there's fewer and fewer people that are interested in going back and playing World of Warcraft. Yeah, this looks like I'm gonna end rank here. Lose rank and call it a day. I think the only victory I've had today was because of a network disconnect. Let's see. The Gungrave Gore game is officially coming to Xbox Game Pass at release, which we'd already heard this. Capcom has confirmed its lineup for the Tokyo Game Show online presentation, including Street Fighter 6, Monster Hunter, Resident Evil, Mega Man, and Exoprimal, which I guess I am a little surprised by Exoprimal because I forgot that game existed. Street Fighter 6 is weird looking, and it's going to be a hard sell. Monster Hunter and Resident Evil games and Mega Man games are not super surprising. Maybe the Mega Man game is a little surprising as something to highlight. Okay. Toss this. Destroy this. Can he just bring it back? Yeah, so that was just a waste of cards. Football Manager 2023, including a PS5 version, will be released in November, if you're interested in that, according to Video Games Chronicles. The Epic Games Store has revealed its next free titles, Spirit of the North and The Captain will be free. I guess the game is probably, quote, The Captain. Spirit of the North, you play as a fox. The Captain, apparently a sci-fi adventure game. I continuously get these games for free, but I have never once wanted to play anything on the Epic Games Store. And there are several games, in fact, that I even own exclusively on the Epic Games Store that I don't own on Steam, and I still would just buy them a second time on Steam without even really knowing that I was buying them duplicate, or that I got them for free on the Epic Games Store. But it makes sense for every PC gamer to have a potential backup of games in case Steam gets shut down at some point, which that'd be insane, but that'd really suck. Alright. So he's gonna destroy everything, so the only card I should try to banish here would be this. That doesn't seem like that's gonna stop anything, no? It definitely does feel like a different meta now. I don't feel like I'm playing the same people. This may be a case where we're playing a lot of people that are playing random decks, but I'm still losing to those people playing random decks. So this is inherently what will happen anytime you get an update. Is if you're not staying up with the times, you will fail miserably. I wonder, I guess if I didn't even really inflict a lot of damage there. Let's see. Need to spectate it to live, and yeah, my mouse is feeling wonky again. Probably it's time for me to reboot my computer anyways. I tend not to try to reboot it or leave anything there. OBS, by the way, for anybody out there that wants to stream, did put out a 28.0.1 update to address some bugs a couple days ago. They didn't so far put out any other like hot fixes, so you might be alright. It might be fairly safe at this point to use 28.0.1, although there are still a decent number of plugins that I'm not sure you have actual support or full support with version 28, so it probably would behoove you to just wait longer if you can, and you probably can. Like, in a lot of ways it doesn't make a lot of sense to update any software anywhere unless it's a security update, and I feel like it'd be great if there were security updates that were always separated from software and feature updates, but that doesn't happen in Windows, and it kind of happens in Linux, but not even really. Like, you'll get security updates for the kernel and things like that, but you tend not to get just security updates for generic software. Android, I think, is pretty good about security updates for the operating system. Probably not anywhere as good as far as the software features. And at a certain level, Android is a little bit more sandbox, so the idea of software needing a security update is less likely to occur. EA announces a new Battlefield studio and a campaign led by Halo's co-creator. Ridgeline Games is focused on developing a narrative campaign in the Battlefield universe, which definitely feels like this is them handing over the Battlefield line to a new company so they can eventually get rid of whoever was in charge of the narrative storyline for Battlefield before that point. Which makes some sense, because I don't think Battlefield has done great in the past couple iterations. Apparently, according to Video Games Chronicles, Stalker 2 refunds are reportedly being issued due to release date postponement. It's claimed Xbox is telling customers that the game has been delayed to an unconfirmed date. Is Stalker 2 developers in Ukraine? I think they are. The game was being developed in Ukraine studio by the Ukrainian studio GSC Game World. It was based in Kiev and has since partially relocated to the Czech Republic. Sniper Ranger says, "Sorry, I'm back. What did I miss?" You missed me losing a lot. That's all you missed in a lot of video game news. Let's see, moving on. Video Game Chronicles says Amy Hennig's Marvel game is reportedly starring Captain America and Black Panther. And Lego came out with a Black Panther set that was like $300. And it looks fine, but it definitely doesn't look like it's $300. Amy Hennig, if I recall correctly, is the lady that keeps getting in charge of projects, and then the projects never make it to the release date. So a Black Panther and Captain America game in a World War II setting. Okay, sure, you could have a game there that you really have no idea, though, until you start to see some trailers and teasers, what it would really even be. You're in a weird position, certainly pushing Black Panther and Captain America as characters, because you're going to have to either replace them with new actors, since Captain America's fairly old and I don't think he's willing to do any more movies, and then the Black Panther actor died. So it might make some sense to make video games around characters that you can't or don't want to replace and shouldn't replace in the movies. But then setting it in a World War II setting is also a little weird. But you can basically do anything with video games and make them good. It's just if you get lucky, and it definitely is a question as to whether Amy Hennig is she just really unlucky in that it feels like at least her last 3 projects were canceled out from under her, or is she just a bad leader and doesn't fight for projects well enough. But yeah, she was the Uncharted director, and Uncharted was a decent game series, but I don't even think it was particularly great. If anything, that might be the problem, is that Amy Hennig's entire career may be the case of someone who got lucky making a Indiana Jones ripoff game, and it's selling fairly well because it was a PlayStation exclusive and it was decent enough, and then trying to ride off of that success for the rest of their career. And in the same way that we see some movie directors do the same thing. They get one successful giant movie and then they can't do anything else ever, or they can't live up to the success of that first success. Let's see. Call of Duty Warzone's mobile was officially announced ahead of a full reveal next week. Oh, the Project Nike mobile game. Apparently, even though it's being made by ShiftUp, it's also in partnership with a company I think called Lightning Games. So, and it seems like it's aged 12 plus. So, it does for the creator of the lewd waifu game Destiny Child, ShiftUp, to move towards Project Nike, and if the game is going to be 12 plus, and they're partnering with another company, which they seem to really love to partner with other companies to get, I guess, publishing funding or something, because they just don't seem like they just want to make their own games. But it does give me the feeling that in the next couple of weeks, I imagine when Nike actually comes out, that it'll be fairly disappointing, and I'll look at it for like a week or two and then be bored with it, which is probably a fine outcome anyways. I don't really have time for two cell phone gotcha games as far as mobile games. And it's a sad statement, certainly, in that of all the potential video games for Android, I have seen exactly one that I've liked and stuck with, and that's over the course of probably 15 years or thereabout. It's just like, as far as gaming on Android, it's terrible, and gaming on Apple, I don't think is much better. That new satellite connection technology was slightly interesting on the Apple 14 announcement, but for emergencies, it's like a special service though. You only get for 2 years, then you have to pay for it on top of that. And Android is going to immediately partner with someone else and put it in their operating system too. It's a nice little assurance thing that nobody will actually use, but for the people that hike and get lost in the mountains, it will also probably save them several hundreds of dollars buying separate, like 433 megahertz SOS beacons. Although arguably, maybe you still would take that if you're going to go hiking. So, like, because it might be way harder to be found with an iPhone sending an SOS to a satellite than for a 433 megahertz SOS beacon to be set off and get it through radio signals. It also potentially is going to take several minutes to send a small SOS text through the satellites, so it's not like it's not like it's going to evolve. It's almost certainly never going to evolve to a point where you're getting Starlink level of satellite internet throughout the world, although they'd like to do that. It's just not realistic that would ever happen. It's more realistic that we'll get quantum entanglement materials, which they did see some evidence that quantum materials actually exist. That's like quantum particles that interact with each other to make a material, whereas it was theory up until that point, where they saw that potential existence or evidence of that existing, because it could have literally just been quantum particles never interact with other quantum particles, and you can't have a quantum material. And I don't know exactly how you would use that, but almost certainly it will be helpful to get to a potential future in which we might have quantum entanglement cell phones that work anywhere in the universe and don't require cell towers or anything like that. Sniper Ranger said a while back, Chris Evans is 41. I think he can handle a few more movies if he wants to. And then he says I can rewatch on what I missed, so I'm fine with that. Fine on that. Yeah. Where was I? Yeah. Yeah, Chris Evans is not super old. That I don't think that's the problem so much. He just doesn't want to get typecast as doing only one action movie and one action character. Like he probably is a good candidate to become the next Tom Cruise and even do better than Tom Cruise and not just do a whole bunch of Mission Impossible movies, but do several different action movies. Because Tom Cruise is pretty old, and we need new up and coming actors for lots of movies. I definitely wonder if movies continue to be made, if they're going to eventually just run out of younger actors, because they often prefer to keep the older men as the main draw. And you see that with like Arnold Schwarzenegger is a great example. Just him coming back for all the Terminator movies, and it's still not really working. They seem to be fairly willing to get rid of the female actors still for younger replacements. So there is a difference there. Let's see, moving on to video game news though. Microsoft is testing a new Xbox dashboard ahead of its launch in 2023, which, okay. Like, I suppose there's been at least 2 or 3 updates since I last played the Xbox 360 as far as different dashboards. This definitely feels kind of like the Vista idea of different squares, and doesn't really look great to me. Ideally, I think Netflix has a pretty I think Netflix has got the interface pretty perfectly in that the squares should be, for the most part, the same height and the same width, and it should be one row. And then for every category, it just goes down and down and down. So I'd say this trying to be full screen start here is probably not a smart move. And they probably should try to use more of the square footage and show less background because some of this definitely is just advertisements. The Microsoft Store leaving Xbox Game Pass soon. But yeah, you can even have like smaller squares kind of expand out when you highlight them, and accordion, collapse and expand. That's fine. But I also kind of would wonder if a lot of the dashboards and interfaces are getting to a point where it is a lot of round car, square car mentality, where they are literally just making one type of interface to the employees, are making one type of interface to justify their jobs, and then they're waiting a couple years to just refresh it, and then they're doing a different kind of interface to continue to justify their jobs. A lot like how rounded curves on cars were the big fad for a long time, and then square curves on cars were a fad for a while, and now we're, I think, mostly to rounded curves where people aren't really looking for boxy cars anymore just because they want better efficiency on airflow. Let's see, Sniper Ranger says, for younger replacement, what's wrong with what we have now? Even though Queen Latifah's old, if she wants to do movies, I wouldn't mind at all. That is an example, by the way. The problem, my concern, and maybe it's not a valid concern, is that I just think what we'll have is potentially a case of like what we have in the Rock era. You have Kiss and Queen, whatever's left of Queen, Kiss is probably the best example just to stick to, where there really isn't a new generation of successful rock and roll people in the rock music industry, because that whole genre has just aged. And so yeah, going to see Kiss now is fine, but 10 years, 20 years is probably some of, if not all of the members of Kiss will be really, really old or dead. The rock industry in general had a lot of people die fairly early because of drugs and alcohol, and they just didn't do that apprenticeship idea, and movies don't really do the apprenticeship idea correctly. Like, theoretically, whether it's art or it's a job, an industry, or anything, you have to raise up a generation to replace the current generation. And you have to train them and hope that they're better and more efficient, and or just at least as good as the previous generation. And you just don't see that happening at all in actors, particularly in movies in particulars. And it's been a long time coming, certainly, where the people that were getting movies that were kid actors are basically people that had to do their entire teenage years on Nickelodeon TV shows, and even then that didn't really work that well. Like Keenan and Kel, kind of a great example of actors that didn't really get anywhere in their adult acting careers, and one of them's even on Saturday Night Live and wasn't even that good of an actor. So yeah, and TV acting and movie acting has always been separated out. So movie acting, I would say, is probably even worse. Like I can't name a single kid actor, or even new and upcoming young movie actor, as there are fewer and fewer movies being made. And inherently, yes, we just need more movies. It would make a ton of sense for the current actors to get the same amount of roles as they are now, and there'd just be twice as many movies being made, and then there's also a bunch of new people to see. It's probably been at least 3 decades since there was a movie that said, come see this new brilliant actor that in their debut movie. Whereas if you look at like James Dean or Elvis movies, like there was a movie starring James Dean that was his debut movie. There was a movie starring Elvis that was debut movie, and those were big deals back in the day, many decades ago. I don't think, in the last 3 decades that any movie has been sold as a debut movie for any actor. If there is something like that, it would be like a strong older actor bringing in also a support actor to balance it out. Netflix just put out a trailer specifically for Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery, which is, I guess, a spiritual sequel to Knives Out. And that's kind of a great example of a movie that is going to have a lot of famous actors in it, like the original Knives Out, doing an ensemble cast. And I don't know if there is a specific breakout new actor or actress that's going to be in Glass Onion, but there probably is somebody, at least one. Let's see, Sniper says a lot of them are a part of people's childhood shows and movies, so I don't know if replacing them when they don't want to leave is a good idea. Anyway, that's the last thing I'm going to say, so I won't disturb you more. Yeah, I'm stammering like crazy and getting distracted. But I was doing that before Sniper Ranger was talking to me anyway, so that's just me being out of sorts. I said that at the beginning of the stream, is that I just feel out of it today, like I got up on the wrong side of the bed. Yeah, there definitely is an argument for having Captain America stay as Captain America, because that's what a generation has grown up with. So it is a I'm not trying to make the argument that they should replace Captain America with a new person in Marvel movies. Chris Evans probably should go back and play Captain America if they're going to include him as a character. My concern is other movies. Like if Chris Evans, for instance, was Captain America and the star of 3 or 4 movies in the same year, that would be fairly crazy. Back to video game news though. The increased stock helps the PlayStation 5 become the UK's best-selling console to date. Which, okay. There was some speculation that the newest version of the PlayStation 5 may be using the 6nm process, and that might be the significant changes internally, is that they've just changed it. Sniper Ranger saying, "Lol, are you okay?" Yeah, no. Like, I'm normal for me, which is never really okay. Like, I just think I didn't sleep very well, and that happens sometime. And I just think my insomnia's got me feeling out of sorts, and I've been banging my head against trying to program, and whenever I do that and it goes poorly, that gets me out of sorts too. Just distracted. Let's see. Moving on to the Video Games Chronicle article, last Video Games Chronicle article. The PlayStation-backed Deviation game has lost its Call of Duty boss. The co-founder Jason Blundell has left the studio, which is making an original IP, which that probably doesn't spell good news for the original IP. This is an odd choice to show. This was apparently a design summit in 2022. Here, everybody's wearing this deep purple shirt, which I don't know what that specifically means. Let's see. Deviation will continue to be led by the fellow co-founder Dave Anthony, who is assuming the role of game director this year. Deviation has also announced that the Westwood Studios Command & Conquer and Blade Runner co-founder Lewis Castle has joined the company as senior vice president in development. That definitely seems like some people are moving around. It might be for the better, but it almost certainly doesn't spell good news. Yeah. Alright, so now we're at the Gematsu articles. Sonic Frontiers' ending theme song was announced. It was vandalized by One OK Rock. I think we'd already talked about that. Dragon Quest X Offline shows a show of full information pre-launch special live stream is set for September 11th, which, I guess the Japanese probably don't care that much to have an announcement on September 11th. They probably don't consider it that much as an issue. And honestly, September 11, 9/11 happened so long ago, even people in the United States probably should start doing more on 9/11 instead of just moping around and doing nothing on that day. But telling anybody to get over anything is kind of a ridiculous statement to even try to make. Definitely some people will never be ready to move on. Famitsu has its review scores for issue 1762, giving Destroy All Humans 2 Reprobed a 31 out of 40, Fairy Fencer F Refrain Chord 31 out of 40, and Trigger Trinity 31 out of 40. They're fairly consistent on their reviews because they have 4 people review each game, which is way more than any other review site really does for one individual group of people. Yeah, I didn't really know Destroy All Humans Reprobed was out yet. PlayOn and Toy Logic have announced a free-to-play multiplayer medieval warfare game Warlander for consoles and PC. The PC open beta launches September 12th. See if these screenshots look particularly interesting. It's a little surprising that that they never really made a more accurate game kind of based off of like Totally Accurate Battle Simulator, because that was somewhat popular for a brief moment there, and nobody ever really succeeded in making a medieval feudal times fighting game that worked, although in fairness lots of people tried. Sniper Ranger says, I'm gonna leave, see you around. Okay, thanks for watching. PlayStation 5 system software update is now available. It has 1440p support, game lists, and more. I think we pretty much covered that. A game called Undetected for PC launches September 30th via Steam, Epic Games Store, and Good Old Games. We haven't had any stories around Good Old Games this year, which is probably good news for Good Old Games, that there hasn't been any major controversy. The romance visual novel Amakano is coming to Switch on November 24th in Japan, which here you have some anime girls. Although I would kind of assume, since this one is wearing a sweater and these are wearing jackets, there's a slight chance that the one in the middle is of a different class than the ones in the jackets. Like she might be the older character, or these two might be a year older characters, but they are inherently wearing pretty much the same outfits, and they are school outfits, so it'll be interesting to see if this one makes its way to Steam or not. We haven't had a ton of visual novels being announced in the past year or so, so even the announcements seem fairly low compared to previous years. Let's see, moving on, Gamatsu says Gotham Knights, the Bat Family behind the scenes trailer is available if you're interested in looking at that. I suppose if they really are not going to have Batman in this game, they could make Alfred effectively be a better Batman, Bat Dad to the Batman family. I suppose that could happen. Although I kind of feel like at least a couple of these characters hate each other in most canon. So it'll be interesting to see if there's a real dynamic to the Bat family. You kind of have to write these characters to dislike each other to some degree, because otherwise in the comics it would just be too logical for Batgirl to always be hanging out with Red Hood, to always be hanging out with Dick Grayson, to always be hanging out with Red Robin. And I suppose they're not even going with Damian here. I don't think this is supposed to be Damian, who is the like Talia al Ghul son of Batman, or yeah, son of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul. Although I don't even know if that's canonical now. They may have gotten rid of Damian, but there really should be yet another Robin character, I think, to make like a fourth, if not fifth, Robin character. Regardless, I'm still not really that interested in Arkham Knights. Let's see, Pokemon Scarlet and trailer, details and screenshots, treasure hunts, auto battles, new Pokemon, and Switch OLED model. So that's quite a dump of information. Auto battles is an interesting idea, though. Like, all of a sudden, you've intrigued me at some level. If I can auto battle a lot of the grind away in Pokemon, then you've got a JRPG that actually might have some appeal. Ideally, I would like to see an auto battle that would get rid of a lot of grind in most JRPGs. This character, I would kind of assume that this is the new leader of a Team Rocket type organization. This character is oddly, wildly designed and dressed compared to other characters that are oddly, like, kind of boringly dressed. It's like the artist demanded, they begged for one character to look interesting. And then the Pokemon don't really look like anything, and seeing them in flat 2D form is not really that accurate towards what they'll look like in the 3D form anyways for either the people or the Pokemon. So it is kind of silly to even show 2D images. Yep. But yeah, I will again say auto battles are an intriguing idea. A game called Snufkin Melody of Moomin Valley is going to be published by Raw Fury. New trailer announces the publishing partnership. Let's see what this trailer looks like, because that actually intrigues me. Skip around. Is it a point and click adventure game? Kind of feels like that. The Spirit in the Mouse launches September 26th for PC and Switch. I saw a game, and this probably is a joke game that won't ever really come out, where it was a squirrel with a gun. And so it's like, you play as a squirrel, there are several different guns, including an Uzi that you pick up, and then I guess you're shooting people as this tiny squirrel holding up a gun that's the same size of their own of its body. Right. So there's a mouse, and then there's like a spark. Interesting. And what does that lead to? A mouse that can follow along and carry electricity? Okay. And there's going to be some platforming and some puzzling around that. There might be something to that, but it also might be fairly mediocre. Void Terrarium 2 is coming to the West in spring 2023. I don't feel like Void Terrarium 1 caught a lot of people's attention. I don't recall Void Terrarium being a dungeon crawler, but again, it didn't catch my attention much, so it could have been a dungeon crawler and I just didn't even remember. The game Process of Elimination is coming to the West in 2023. Fairly quickly, once these games are getting announced in Japan, they're getting Western announcements a week later. Which I have to admit, the Japanese are pretty great in the past. They've been pretty great about doing that, where they will get some news coverage one week and then they'll leak out some more information or put out a news press memo the next week for some more information. Monster Menu, the Scavenger's Cookbook, is coming to the West in 2023 for PS5, PS4, and Switch. And notice that they are just saying 2023, spring of 2023, because they'll put out several different announcements. Looks like this is probably a half cooking, half dungeon crawling strategy RPG game. Probably not going to catch my attention. Raiden 4 X Mikado remix for PS4, PS5, Xbox Series, Xbox One, and PC launches January 31st in North America and February 3rd in Europe. Which Raiden is just a shoot 'em up game. But the Raiden shoot 'em up series has some relevancy, so if I was going to play a shoot 'em up game, the Raiden series really probably should be the series to play. Although I kind of question just how long a Raiden game, even a brand new one, would last, because those really were games that were designed to suck away quarters and be done with in a couple hours if you had an infinite amount of money. They were arcade games first and foremost, so I don't know if Raiden 5 really could be 5 hours of gameplay, and whether it'd even be fun for 5 hours. Grim Grimoire Once More is coming to the West in the spring of 2023 for the PS5, PS4, and the Switch. What's funny is the Tokyo Game Show hasn't happened yet, so all of these announcements for the West, that's some interesting full English breakfast, although it's corn. I don't think you usually get corn in a full English. So it is kind of the case that they're getting the announcements that the games are coming out to the West out early to make room for more announcements potentially during the Tokyo Game Show. Once again, Gungrave Gore coming to the Xbox Game Pass on day one. Atomic Heart is going to be published by Focus Entertainment, and it has been delayed to winter. Atomic Heart is the weird BioShock inspired Russian game, I believe. Let's just click on this trailer and see. Yep, this was this new trailer they put out. Yeah, I won't bother watching it a second time on stream, but yeah, in a funny way, I'm a little surprised that it even is a game that is still in development, because it could have very easily been quietly canceled and most people would have forgotten about it, even though it was very interesting visually. That doesn't inherently mean it's going to be good, and we still don't know if it's going to be good if it's being delayed. We hope it's going to be good, but being delayed doesn't inspire confidence for sure. A game called Potionomics launches October 17th, available in standard and deluxe editions for PC, which I guess this is a card-based battle game in that you don't have a team, so you can be a little bit more zoomed in and the graphics can be a little bit better looking, which, you know, that might be a better way to go, frankly. It does also look like there's several other screens where you do things, so it's not just the battle screen. So it looks very nicely animated, maybe overly animated for what the actual game is. Interesting that in the middle of your trailer you have two girls kissing. I guess there's romance visual novel elements to it, and kissing leads to unlocking cards potentially. And there could be something to this. It definitely looks very nicely polished. I hope it plays well. Let's see, the fight is heating up between Microsoft and PlayStation. I don't know if we really covered this in detail on Wednesday. Microsoft proposed to keep Call of Duty on the PlayStation for 3 years after the current deal, and Jim Ryan of PlayStation, Sony of California said it was inadequate on many levels publicly. arguing that he took it public because Microsoft had taken part of the negotiations public by saying they had offered to do this. Inherently, Microsoft kind of has to play nice until the Activision Call of Duty acquisitions happen, and Jim Ryan and Sony can push buttons and try to get better contracts and better deals. Although you have to be careful, because right now Jim Ryan is not really coming off as the good guy, and Microsoft is coming off as fairly reasonable, saying we'll promise to keep it on the consoles for at least 3 years, when they really could say we're not making any contracts or promises until the acquisition goes through, which would probably be a better stance to say all negotiations are on hold until the acquisitions go through. But yeah, it does kind of feel like there's very much at least one ego, if not probably two egos fighting here, more than Sony doing best for its customers or Microsoft doing best for its business. Because Microsoft inherently probably does better having Call of Duty on the PlayStation than not, so I don't think they're really lying about that aspect of it. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some aspect or some promises that have to be made to get the acquisition to go through, but I doubt it's going to be something as big as Call of Duty's offices and the IP of Call of Duty having to be split off and not acquired by Microsoft, and everything else being acquired instead. Let's see, moving on. Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid Burst Forth Chorogon Breath Director's Cut is coming out to PC in October. This game came out, I think, about a year ago. Director's Cut includes additional illustrations and adjusted difficulty. I don't think this game particularly sold very well. Also, Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid is an anime that I don't think is really airing right now. I think it's already had its run and people are uninterested in it in Japan. At this point, I am not really up on what is big on anime at this season, or the past couple seasons anyways. So, yeah. It oddly is a shoot 'em up game, and I was not expecting that. So, an anime tie-in to a shoot 'em up, probably not the most interesting thing. Let's see. And I guess maybe either this game is not in a regular form available on Steam, which seems to be the case, or it's on Steam by a completely different developer and a completely different publisher. Cardfight Vanguard, Dear Days, also coming out. Neither one of those games look particularly interesting. Dragon Quest X offline web commercials are available if you want to watch them. They look like they're live action web commercials. Playism's game show, Tokyo Game Show preview live stream is set for September 14th. Which, yeah, I believe Tokyo Game Show starts on the 15th. Or maybe the 14th. Star Ocean, the Divine Force character trailers for Midas Felgreed and Nina DeForest. I assume this is Nina. So you can watch those trailers if you're interested. I don't know if Star Ocean is particularly a series that a lot of people are still into, or were ever into. A game called Cannon Dancer for PS4, 5, and Xbox One and Series and Switch launches in early 2023. This looks a little pixely, but it might be something. Let's see if we can jump through the trailer. And yeah, looks like a lot of like an old arcade game. Maybe even like the original Ninja Gaiden game. We may have hit a point where there's too much nostalgia and game developers think they can just release games that look like games from the 80s or early 90s, and I can't help but feel like this is a game that only exists because they think there's a nostalgia for that gameplay style and that animation style, when that's just not how nostalgia works. Nostalgia is based on the characters. There does seem to be kind of an artistic choice here where you're seeing a lot of statues of female forms around the game, but I don't think that's going to sell well enough. The game Lil Noah Scion of Paradise has a second major update now available, adding a witch trial mode, which I have to be reminded as to what this game is. It says it's an action roguelike game on PC, it's also PS4 and Switch. So there's a Steam link where we can get a better idea of what it looks like. It's on the following list. It's from Games. How does this really play? A roguelite player versus event, single player only game. It's a lot of characters and items. The actual game though seems to be kind of a half Smash Brothers, half platforming experience where you're playing, I think, with cards to actually activate actions. Well, I guess people love this, so I'm gonna resolve to mob rule on this one. Although I guess at this point, if there's more content coming, that's also a big deal for a single player game. But I will have to say personally, I think I would probably skip this game, generally speaking. Like, as much as I might like the anime looking thumbnail here, when you actually see how they're depicted, either this is a different character or the characters in general are depicted as more of these soft chibi, low polygon chibi characters. So this art style just doesn't really even connect to it. Moving on, RGG Summit 2022, Roya ga Gotoku Studio has a new title presentation set for September 2014th. This is basically announcements for the Tokyo Game Show. Unexplored 2, The Wayfarer's Legacy, is coming to the PS4 on September 14th, then getting actually listed on the 14th instead of just announced. The Famitsu sales have been updated. Let's see if we can look. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for the Nintendo Switch All-Star Battle R is new, and it was a top seller. Earth Defense Force 6 still selling pretty good. We've got Made in Abyss starring Star Falling into Darkness selling pretty well, considering I didn't think people really liked it that much. Last of Us Part 1 selling pretty good at 10,000. Although, honestly, if you're only selling 10,000 units in Japan and you're in the 5th place, you kind of know that this wasn't much of a week for sales. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure all the way in the 20th spot for the PlayStation 5 version, and in the 11th spot for the PlayStation 4 version. Actual hardware still selling like crazy for the Switch OLED models and Switch's regular models compared to decent sales for the PS5. Switch Lite still selling pretty well. Xbox Series X. At some point, we probably should adjust whether 4,000 is a good number of sales, but 4,000 for the Xbox in Japan is not terrible. Definitely nothing compared to like the 10 PS4s or the 56 new 2DS LLs. Some of these numbers are probably so small because there's a bunch of used PS4s and 2DS LLs available, and that probably is why there's such a big jump between the Series S and that one, is that there probably aren't any used Series S or Series X units in Japan. Football Manager 2023 announced for the PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series, Switch, PC, iOS, Android, and Apple Arcade, but oddly not the PS4, according to Komatsu. I already talked about EA establishing a new studio, Ridgeline Games. The game There Is No Light for PC launches September 19th, which I think I'd seen something about this before. No. It says it's an action RPG. Okay. It does definitely feel like a game that could heavily suffer from like dark screenshot syndrome, where it's just too dark for its own good. Like you can't even really tease the idea of being dark. Even if you're a game set in a dark cave or a game set in hell, you have to find creative ways to make it incredibly brightly lit for most players. Me in particular, I would say, like, my eyesight does not appreciate dark backgrounds and dark foregrounds mixed together. I can appreciate it certainly if there was like a high dynamic range screen and I was in a completely blacked out theater, but that's about the only scenario where that looks good. Moving on, Evil West has a second extended gameplay trailer, which, what kind of game is that? An action game? I thought it was like a strategy placement game, but I might be thinking of a different game. Yeah, everything this trailer is showing me is mostly cutscenes, but these definitely don't feel like cutscenes in a strategy top-down placement game, so I must have been thinking of something completely different. Okay, this might be cool. I almost feel like there was another game that wasn't too far from what Evil West was that had already come out. Maybe that was a bit more of a multiplayer game. This might be more of a single player game, it's hard to tell. Well, it definitely looks like something different. Western guy shooting demons. You don't see that too often in video games. Twitch Gaming ID at Xbox Fall Showcase 22 is set for September 14th, so it seems like there is an attempt to also make a Twitch Gaming event happen right before the Tokyo Game Show. Square Enix has trademarked a Radic engine in Japan, which might be a new internal engine, or it might just be a new name for an internal engine. Currently, Square Enix only has one publicly known internal engine called the Luminous engine, developed by Lumious Productions, which powers the upcoming open world action RPG Forspoken. And it would be really bad if they were shifting engines for Forspoken, so you hope that that is for a new game. Or maybe it's just a game called Radic Engine, that's another possibility. We already talked about Deviation Games co-founder of Jason Blundell departing. This would be another like great example where you would like to be able to click Jason Blundell on a website and see they've made a tag for him, and there's literally no other stories that have ever mentioned him or been tagged with him. And he's too big of a person who's been in the industry too long for there not to have been other stories about people. Like, inherently, we raise up these auteur game directors, game developers, often just people in charge of game companies. We raise them up as if they are these amazing artists who are really doing all the creative work to make games. But we, and by we I mean mainstream video game journalists and gamers in general, we very quickly forget like what people have done in the past outside of maybe remembering that they had a hand in making a game, which is a very ideal situation certainly for the game developers. Like, if I could certainly only be remembered for all my successes and all of my failures were buried away and unable to be looked up, that would be great. But it's not realistic, and it's certainly not news to really only talk about the good times and talk about when people are succeeding, or at least for the most part do that until you hit the point where you have a channel or a website just straight up trying to cancel somebody. But I've also certainly complained in the opposite way, so I'm being a bit hypocritical, because I definitely have complained about GameDeveloper.com bringing up the same previous articles about Ubisoft over and over again when there's just no news and no reason to mention those elements. I think in part, though, when GameDeveloper.com brings up articles about Ubisoft that they've written that were basically slander pieces, they put it in the actual article instead of just tagging it Ubisoft and then being able to let the reader choose themselves whether they want to see previous articles about Ubisoft. They make it very obvious, and they definitely try to get you to clickbait you into reading the previous articles about Ubisoft when they do that. And in all fairness, they haven't even done that in a while, so they're maybe getting a little bit better. We have maybe about 30 more tabs, and then we'll be done for today. Success Corporation and Studio Saizen Sin announced a naval tower offense game called Buccaneer for PS4 and Switch. I think we had already kind of covered this. Anime girls, but for the most part, it seems like you're in the ship, not seeing the anime girls anyways. It's much more about the Navy stuff, I think. And they're like sailboats, when arguably it would make more sense if they weren't sailboats. Seems like one character may have a magic wand, so wouldn't you have some magic form of preparation? Then as you look at these characters, you're seeing a fairly high emphasis on depicting the characters that are barely going to even show up in the game. Every real screenshot of the game is actually just ships on seas and doesn't look particularly interesting. Stranger in Paradise Final Fantasy Origin DLC Wanderer of the Rift launches October 26th, according to Komatsu, for PS4, 5, Xbox One Series, and PC. Kagado Studio is going to showcase two new titles at Tokyo Game Show. One is likely a Tristia of the Deep Blue Sea project. I'm not sure I know Kagado Studios. A game called Rare Dirge 2 has been announced for the PS4 and 5 and Switch, which looks like a very old game. Definitely not appealing. A game called Monochrome Mobius Rights and Wrongs Forgotten has been delayed to November 17th. Looks like it's a JRPG for the PS4, 5, and PC. we might be seeing a little bit more of that, where things are coming just to the PS4 and 5 and PC, where for a long while it was coming to the PS4 and 5 and Switch and PC, or just 4 and 5 and the Switch, or just 4 and Switch. A game called Voez, VOEZ, for Switch has a version 1.11 update now available, adding 50 songs. I'm fairly certain this is a music rhythm game. Yep. And then Kizuna AI, or I as in love in Japanese, Touch the Beat, is coming to PS4 and PS5. That's another rhythm game with an anime character. Looks like it's a VR game in particular. Which arguably, if I was going to get VR, that might be the type of game that would probably stream better than anything else. And then we're at the GameDeveloper.com articles. Crystal Dynamics is taking control of Tomb Raider at Embracer. So it is. Embracer recently purchased both Crystal Dynamics and the Tomb Raider franchise from Square Enix in different deals. And so now Tomb Raider is being handed to Crystal Dynamics, which was the company that made the Tomb Raider reboots, which makes a lot of sense, except for maybe it doesn't make the most sense in that I don't know if Crystal Dynamics really is the best person that Embracer Group owns to make a new trilogy for Tomb Raider, because they've already had their time in the sun with their Tomb Raider reboot trilogy. It's probably time to hand it over to a new company. Valve is introducing a personalized store hubs to Steam to boost discoverability. These new pages now make it easier to explore all kinds of different niches within Steam, which I guess in a lot of ways this is what this bar is what they're highlighting. I have to point out too, Valve at this point is almost 100% away from being blue. They have been slowly turning their backgrounds and their thematic colors away from blue and going more and more towards black. And yes, they're doing kind of a patterned background here with some squares, but slowly, particularly with every cell, they have moved away from blue further and further, and they're just hoping that nobody complains or nobody notices, which honestly I don't think too many people really does care to keep Valve as a website with the bright blue that it once had. Let's see. So this coming out specifically as a Steam Lab that you have to enable, or does it mean something else? In a lot of ways, this is probably trying to get a interface that works better on the Steam Deck by having the text and descriptions a little bit bigger instead of squeezing it down into small icons, and it is probably trying to embrace more of what a embrace more of a Netflix type depiction. I do have to admit though that they are really all over the place. There's sometimes you get these bigger squares, sometimes you get text, sometimes you don't. Definitely feels like they are experimenting and should probably have more of a consistent thing. If I get just these small squares, I would like to be able to make it a bigger square or get the text without leaving the page. Or at least I'd like it to be consistent. Consistent in height and width. You shouldn't be bumping things up. Having more of a personalized experience would be great if I actually trusted the algorithm that Valve has, but honestly I don't think their algorithm is that great as far as suggestions. Launching in July. you can go to Steam Labs. So let's see. I think I have micro trailers and new discovery queue enabled. Some of these past ones they're saying are shipped. So yeah, really Valve should do a better job of highlighting this. Or just highlighting how many of these features they actually got good at. Deep Dive, though, got shelved. So that system didn't really work. The automatic show got shelved. And I believe the automatic show and the deep dive both heavily relied on kind of more automatic or scripted programming. It wasn't as automatic as it should be. So I imagine that took more upkeep. I definitely question, though, if it is a case that most people that go to Steam do get presented the right games to them, or if they are just getting presented the mainstream AAA games to them, and whether that's really what people should be shown or not. In the same way that many like indie movie people would say we should force people to see more indie movies instead of giving them the popcorn flicks and the rom-coms and the action flicks. But yeah, at some point maybe Valve should just shove in the face of players, hey, check out this game, this is a hidden gem you may have missed type idea. I don't think their algorithm really is around that. I think their algorithm is around what can we convince people to buy as quickly as possible in a world where most people on Steam have bought way too many games already. Moving on, GameDeveloper.com has that same article as far as Amazon Game Boss saying that the MMO was cancelled because Tencent was too big of a company as far as Amazon Games. It's frankly dishonest to say Amazon Games is anywhere as big as Tencent. But yeah, they seem to explain it better in the subtitle without me actually reading either of the articles, that it was Leiyou, Leyyou, being purchased by Tencent that threw a wrench into the plans. Which I guess that if you hadn't planned on doing business with Tencent and then all of a sudden the company you were doing business with was acquired by Tencent, that could be off-putting. EA announces Battlefield campaign is going to be developed by a new studio, Ridgeline Games. We already talked about that. Blizzard confirms the new Overwatch 2 heroes are linked to its Battle Pass, which, yeah, Overwatch 2 is going to be a very different game than Overwatch 1. This was an interesting story I heard about. There is a California lawsuit that accuses GameStop of wiretapping and sharing customer data. The class action lawsuit alleges that GameStop has been recording customer support conversations without the consent of people doing the customer support and then selling the conversations to a third party, which in California, I think specifically it is a two-party consent, and I think probably affirmative consent in California is required. So even if they were saying that these calls are being recorded for support purposes or whatever they claim, that may not be good enough, particularly if they are then selling the conversations. And it seems fairly insane that anybody would even want to buy customer support conversations around GameStop or any other company. Although I imagine, yeah, if you could record good employees doing good customer support, and that was really what you were trying to offer, it might benefit you to buy examples of good customer support from other companies. Unfortunately, it's not good business to give good customer support in almost every scenario. It's better business to do terrible customer support, because you almost always have people over the barrel anyways, and so having long wait times, having undertrained, rude employees, it's perfectly fine. And frankly, speaking from some personal experiences, it usually is the case that the person on the support line, the support employee, just wants to get you off the phone, and the easiest way for them to get you off the phone would be to actually help you, so you just don't call back and try and complain or something. So what stops a lot of employees from doing that is ridiculous micromanagement of time, ridiculous micromanagement of what you can do, horrible software, horrible procedures, just a lack of giving any authority to do anything at all. It is definitely a case where the person on the other side of the phone, the support agent, is being thrown out to be the mincemeat and get mowed down, while the generals, the middle managers, and the upper management are intentionally giving you poor training, poor tools, and telling you to do things that are just wrong. And arguably you fix that probably with some laws. It probably should be illegal not to offer support. It probably should be a case where you get taxed/fined if you get a certain number of complaints against your company. If you could call some company that was actually a government agency, like the Better Business Bureau, which is not really a government agency and has no authority at all. If there was something like that in the United States, and you could call and complain, and if a certain number of complaints happened, or even if they took the top 10% of all businesses in that company and fined them heavily for giving poor customer support, then that would benefit society quite a bit, either by getting tax funds to fund other projects, or by forcing companies to do a better job at supporting their products and services. But nope, everybody in capitalism always preaches the idea of buyer beware, caveat emptorum over and over again, when there's literally no way you could be aware if a product is going to break, or even if you just have a normal issue and you need to call customer support, you have no idea of whether or not they're going to give you proper support or not. So buyer beware is impossible when you can't actually do research to be aware. Moving on, there's an obituary here for Justine der Gregorian, the PlayStation London developer. He also worked on the VR game Blood and Truth. Again, a fairly young looking guy at the age of 44. And, you almost never get a listing as to why they died, and so you can either assume it's either suicide or pandemic related, but you never know. He worked on the game The Blob, which isn't really the longest of resumes. He also worked on Pac-Man, and he worked with studios including Bandai Namco for Pac-Man and Fable maker Lionhead. Horizon Forbidden West and VR Blood and Truth. Yep, not much of a obituary, but kind of average for video game obituaries too. Not much of a resume. Inherently, this is also the problem, is that even if you were 80, you're gonna probably spend 4 to 6 years on one game over and over again in the game industry. So you're talking maybe 10 to 12 games at best gonna show up on your resume. So it's kind of hard to do a video game obituary naming all the games that they've worked on, because the number is always fairly small. And unfortunately, there really isn't another way to, as far as get a claim or a cord as a game developer. Like, you could do a bunch of game jams, certainly, and the video game or gamedeveloper.com could certainly get into more detail about his life, not around being a video game developer and programmer, but that's kind of all you can do. Although inherently, if you're working any job, there's a high chance you can work in a job and have nothing to put on your resume after working there 20, 30, 40 years, because it all just kind of falls under, oh, I maybe led one project at one time, but maybe I never led any project, or maybe I just did the same thing day in and day out for 40 years. And a lot of times in jobs, even if you get a promotion, you're still doing the exact same thing. You're just getting a new title. Moving on, Scopely has acquired Stumble Guys, a competitive platformer that's definitely not Fall Guys. So, yeah, it seems like it's a Fall Guys clone. Alright, let's look at the games that did actually come out. This one says soon and looks like garbage. Everything was out of order. Pro Strategy, football here, I'll put on the fall list. There's a chance here that this might be a throwback to NES football. I actually liked NES football, but never really liked any of the other games. Because as the football games became more realistic, or as there became more plays that you had to memorize or think about strategy, it became less of a simple experience. Whereas NES football really, I think, had maybe 6 plays to pick from, and you could just play like the Hail Mary over and over again and win. And at a certain level, there's some entertainment value in a game that is just stupidly simple, something that just lets you win. I don't think this Alpha Box game is something I'd be interested in. Here we've got one that's tagged sexual content, so let me just make sure all the screenshots are YouTube family friendly. Yeah, there's some boobs and cleavage, but it does seem like they're blurring everything here. Although oddly, what's being blurred here doesn't even really look like there's actual nudity on that. So it's a jigsaw puzzle with some anime characters. Seems like the art style's fairly inconsistent. So either they, I assume, bought these art or just stole the art. Once again, there's no release date or mature content or any promise of an uncensored patch. Here we have one that's already mixed. Which, if it's already mixed, I'm gonna say no to it. And it's fairly pointless to once again say I need to toggle the adult content, but toggle back so to actually see the adult games coming out. But I've been saying that for a week and haven't gotten around to it. Chess, but white moves twice. I don't think anybody would really care about that. That just seems like an odd break from what chess is. This looks good enough to potentially get a spotlight YouTube short, but I don't really want to play it. Without Kidney. is an interesting title. Coming soon. Match 3 game. Platforming game. Skeletons. We probably are not too far away from starting to see some like low effort Halloween games coming out. I would expect that fairly quickly. Here we have a visual novel, Choose Your Own Adventure. Hime Yoku, Sacrifice of Lust and Grace. This almost certainly is a game that would have a uncensored patch somewhere if it's not being sold here. Let's see. Partial nudity is what it says it has here on Steam, but just looking at these like screenshots, almost certainly there's an instance or a patch here where she's just straight up topless, or at least much more revealing. Same, I would believe here. In a lot of cases, when I see that what seems like fairly obvious censorship, it is almost ridiculous because it does kind of feel like there's just a boob window under that censorship. What is interesting too, though, and I'll put this on the follow list just to see what people say, is that we're not really seeing a lot of pushback towards Steam releases of games that are censored. Usually that's because there's a free uncensorship patch, and the people that would want to play this game, almost all of them want it in an uncensored version. Here we have a student project from Digipen that doesn't look good enough to really highlight. Although arguably I could highlight student projects on YouTube Shorts, and that would give me an opportunity to do something different there. Seems like this is a rubber duck screensaver, for lack of a better term, where you're just observing them. I would think that there would be more of a pushback to it, but also I think most of the people that are playing adult visual novels are just not buying it on Steam. That they're probably getting it from some place like PlayAsia, or there's probably somewhere else that I'm not even aware of, and so they've just never really been a part of the idea of having a massive Steam library, which kind of makes sense. 100 Fires, The Rising of Red Star. This looks like this is a Metal Gear Solid parody slash clone, but oddly, I almost wonder if it also has some lewdness to it, because at least one of the characters seems fairly scantily clad. $5.99. Yeah, no real mature content warning. You know, that might not work. I mean, that might not be terrible as an idea. Like, it probably isn't that hard to make kind of a low effort Metal Gear Solid 1, Metal Gear 1 or 2 game. Particularly if you're just going to straight up steal concepts and steal visuals. And by steal I mean just make your own slight parody version of it and not really do anything new. I guess the question would be, is 100 Fires 1 a game on Steam? Because this says episode 2 and I don't see a second version. Here we have a game tagged hentai, which that would mean animated porn, so let me double check all the screenshots. it definitely once again feels like, at least for the non-adult labeled games, that we've seen 2 or 3 released on this Friday when we really haven't seen that many in the week previous. Looks like it is just a match card game with some anime waifus. And let's see, no real DLC uncensored patch, and no real claim of actually seeing any nudity. Which half of these games I wonder if they are just pretending like there's nudity when there really isn't. I don't know if there really is a target audience though of, I guess, horny teenagers that would get in trouble looking at actual nudity but wouldn't get in trouble looking at lewd, provocative poses of anime characters. I mean, I don't think there really is a lot of teenagers like that. Either you have fairly liberal parents that would be fine with a teenager looking at anime porn, which arguably maybe they should be not looking at the animated kind and just looking at real kind. But I could see arguments for both sides there. But yeah, I think you have either fairly conservative parents that anything lewd would also be unacceptable, or you have fairly liberal parents that don't really care at all. I don't think there's a lot of mushy middle parents that write down specific rules or guidelines. I guess I'm gonna say no to Blade Jumper here. It doesn't quite look good enough. But you know what, I'll give it a follow. And maybe a YouTube short, since the YouTube shorts requirements are fairly low. Here we have another, what looks like anime girl in lewd poses with a match 3 game, which arguably match 3 games are probably the better bet. In this case they're anthropomorphic, if I pronounce that correctly, animal girls with different animals. Let's see if there's any adult content warning. Game contains sexual content. So this is actual adult content. And it does seem like there is a uncensored patch. That would be my guess. So we do see an actual adult game here, and I guess at a certain level I want to see if these games succeed at all going forward. I need more sample size and more data points as far as, do these adult games get reviewed? Do they sell particularly well? It's kind of hard to tell, but on that aspect, because I don't have sales data, but I think a lot of these adult games do sell particularly well and nobody bothers to review them. Let's see. Underwater World Idle Desktop Colony Building Simulator, that's a mouthful. Blood Hospital. There might be something to this as a horror game. It's like a single A or indie horror game, although it's tagged as a hidden object game, which that doesn't seem like that's right. It says it's a first person shooter horror. I'll put this on the follow list. Yep. It's very possible though that nobody ever reviews adult games, because why would you? It's like that Rick and Morty joke, is why would you have a profile on Pornhub? Or why would you be liking videos? Let's see. Keep on burning through games. We got a lot that came out. This Moon Ping is, I think, probably too crazy of a game. I'm gonna give it a follow anyways. Half Dead 3. Interesting, because this is now the third game in relatively short time, so it's probably about 3 years. Instead of kind of improving the two previous games, Half Dead 3 is now out. This is based on the sci-fi movie Cube. It feels like it gets a little bit more, but not a lot more, added to it each time they create one. This was a game that streamers were enjoying for a brief amount of time streaming, but definitely did not become the next big thing. Fall Me On Mo. It's not visually polished enough. The idea of falling down a waterfall might be an interesting idea, as far as like almost like a pachinko machine in video game form. But it would have to be done particularly comedically and not cruelly or brutally. This is garbage game. You kind of have to have a hateable character that would trip and fall down an infinite like waterfall or an infinite cave. There might be something to this game, One Dreamer. And I guess what's going to happen is I'm going to leave a lot of these things up to potentially make YouTube shorts on them, and then yeah, I'm going to end up just making a lot of YouTube shorts that might be for games that aren't really that worth it. I probably am not in the best of mental state and mood to kind of curate this, because I definitely have too many games now for the next week or two of YouTube shorts, and I could definitely release like 2 or 3 YouTube shorts a day, but I didn't really want to do that. This Legend Panda doesn't look like anything. We have about 10 more tabs. Betrayal at Club Low. Yeah, I don't think that's anything. Age of Dynasty looks like absolute garbage. Which is a shame. There's been several of those where like they were set in primitive times, and none of them have been particularly good as far as a colony simulator. I think we can say no to Wilder Peace here. Wilder Place. Flurp looks like way too many particle effects. Road Frog is just a Frogger clone. I wish this was actually up here, because then I could move the mouse a lot further. Of course, I could probably, if I had a mouse with more buttons, do something else anyways to go forward and back. This is from January 2021, so this may just be more fall list cleanup. I'll put that on the wish list unless it's a VR game. Trikaya. Trigger Witch is from May 2022. I think we could probably remove that from the fall list. So this went just directly into the fall list cleanup because I opened the tabs in a different order. This is a VR game, so I'll just leave it on the follow list. This is also a VR game. Seems like there's 2 Trickster VR games. Trick and Treat Remake does have 30 reviews positively, but I kind of feel like I want to just say no to this. Remake of the free game for $1.99. Lighthearted Halloween adventure in a vampire's house where you explore a mansion and solve puzzles. Like, the idea of remaking something that was free and then charging money probably shouldn't rub me the wrong way, but it kinda does. And yeah, overall this does just kind of feel like an RPG Maker game, so I'm gonna take that off the follow list. Tribes of Midgard is well received from Gearbox Publishing. July 27, 2021. Is this a single player game? Yes, but it has online co-op, but I also wouldn't be surprised if the co-op is fairly dead, so be careful with that. Tribe War. I think we can say no to this game. I think I only put it on the follow list because it notably is stealing art from Danganronpa here. They definitely didn't animate that. Take that off the follow list. It's still listed. If anything, that just shows that you can kind of steal art and have it on Steam without there being a immediate takedown. Somebody has to actively find your game and do a DMCA. Well, this looks like a card game with some twist to it. It looks fairly nicely polished, so I'll put it on the wish list. Although arguably CCGs or collectible card games or trading card games, TCGs, I probably should start to think about significantly reducing the numbers of those types of games on my wish list, because I really don't have a lot of interest in playing too many of them. You should just play the best of the best. Like, inherently, I don't think I'm probably going to buy too much, if anything, during the winter sale, because I just have too many games already. And so I might be a decent time to go through my wish list and just run a fine-tooth comb through it and take out a lot of games. This Trench or Tringa Unlimited, it is a valid twist on like Jenga or Tetris, but still not really anything of great value. Let's go ahead and spectate a thing and get that spectate reward. Meanwhile, I will go through my Twitter feed and see what's new. There's only been like 20 new tweets even. Go ahead and speed that up. Steel Rising, I saw the reviews for Steel Rising already out, and it is available now, which that's kind of a shock. I didn't think that was really happening. Apparently it's also 2K Day, so EA put out a happy 2K Day showing off some of their major characters that they highlighted. Sniper Ranger said, I think I said this before, but I admire your commitment. Yeah, I thank you. That is the right response there. something that I'm probably not the greatest at saying. I am definitely committed, and potentially maybe should be committed to the loony bin for as much effort I've put into this YouTube channel. But also, I really don't have a lot of other options, and it would either be in most cases, either I'm recording video games or I'm sitting around bored. So it gives me something to do. It lets me talk to people. It lets me chat to people when I really wouldn't be doing anything else. Arguably, if I had better options, I probably wouldn't be continuously making YouTube content. But yeah, these streams in particular go really long. They have in the past gone even longer, 4, sometimes 5 hours. Sometimes I've gotten trapped into streams where it's like I've had a couple that were 5, maybe even 6 hours long, and that's a lot, certainly. But I have gotten better at optimizing and just moving forward as quickly as possible. Try not to get into big rants. That's a big deal. Sniper Ranger says you're getting a like from me and you're going to like it. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I definitely started my channel from the concept if you can't do quality, you should do quantity, and that is something that I've been able to do. Arguably, a lot of other YouTube content creators probably spend as much time, if not more, than I do. They just do a lot of editing. They take out the ums and ahs and the awkward pauses, and they don't show the full process. And particularly my pre-recorded footage series, and when I'm playing a regular pre-recorded footage of a game, that's something I didn't really want to show. I didn't want to just turn it into highlights of the awesome parts of playing a video game. I really wanted to show the full experience of playing a video game and comment on the full experience of playing a video game, because that's how real gamers actually experience it. They don't just jump from cool action scene to cool action scene, and they don't get cutaways to gags or jokes. So it is much more of a long form critical essay on a game, whereas most content creators are doing extremely short form memes on a video game, for lack of a better term. Need to do a better job of doing the Duel live in time, because that didn't reset, and logging in on the weekends and at least getting the daily logins. Yeah, Cyan here says a new fan-made age has been added to Mist Online. You can play Mist Online at mistonline.com. The Eternibri has been released on Mist Online. It's seemingly just this one picture, which that looks cool, but not like much really. Still not really sure what you do in Mist Online. Interesting. 2K put out just a code for 10 people to get a copy of 2K23 and receive 25k virtual coins, which probably is not a lot of virtual coins. And Sniper Ranger did mention screw 2K, so he made his feelings known. That's pretty terrible though, to give out just like 10 copies of a game to people randomly on Twitter. The whole giveaways on Twitter have been a massive failure in my opinions, because it was just very quickly scooped up. Almost every giveaway is scooped up by bots, and is not really enjoyed by actual fans. And even if a single actual fan did scoop up a code, it's still not really benefiting all society, all of the gaming community. The thing that did work as far as putting something out on Twitter is the shift keys, because the shift keys are redeemable by everyone, so you just have to go to shift.gearbox.com or wherever it is to redeem them, and it gives you a consistent flow of golden keys, which give you random draws for guns. But I don't think you can actually buy in most of the Borderlands games gold keys anyways, so I don't think there's a microtransaction aspect to it. So yeah, I think the shift system is pretty great, and I'm surprised more people don't have some similar system like that as far as giveaways. Although at a certain point, maybe just daily login rewards would be better than having to follow somebody on Twitter. Particularly now, I don't think companies care if they're followed on Twitter anyways, so giving away shift keys, or keys for games, or keys for rewards in games has become less of a priority for most companies. Even Gearbox has put out fewer shift keys than they used to. And now they're putting out more shift keys for more of their games, which is also a little weird. GameDeveloper.com did have an article here. Valve has launched the official Steam Deck Repair Center. Steam Deck owners previously had to fix whatever issues they had with their handheld themselves. Valve's official repair centers now ease the burden for those who want experienced fixers, which it is fairly early that any Steam Deck should be broken, but I guess there probably are a couple that are broken. I suppose if you're giving Steam Decks to kids, the chances of them being broken goes up quite a bit, but even adults can occasionally just drop a controller and break it. Alright, well, if anything, I guess I feel a little bit more in sorts now after three and a half hours of streaming, so now I probably will try to get some more work done. But yeah, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to further follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.